Story 1. The Disappearing Hiker. Posted by You Haunted Wanderer. 2 summers ago, my friends and I decided to go on a weekend hiking trip in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. We were excited about the adventure, the fresh air, and the chance to disconnect from the world for a few days. Little did we know we would never be the same after that trip. On the second day, we decided to explore a trail that wasn't on our map. It was narrow, overgrown, and clearly hadn't been used in years, but it beckoned us. As we ventured deeper, the forest became denser and eerier. The sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. Around midday, we stumbled upon an old abandoned campsite. There were remnants of a fire pit, a few scattered belongings, and a tent that looked like it had been torn apart by animals. The air around the site was unusually still, and there was an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. We felt uneasy but brushed it off as an old, forgotten sight. That night, while we were setting up camp, we heard footsteps around us. Not the scurrying of animals, but deliberate human footsteps. We called out, thinking it might be another hiker, but no one answered. The footsteps continued, circling our camp, and then they stopped. In the morning, one of our friends, Jake, was missing. We searched frantically, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. His backpack and gear were still there, but he was gone. We notified the authorities and joined the search parties, but after weeks of searching, Jake was never found. A year later, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was calling me back to those woods. I returned, hoping for closure. As I stood at the old campsite, I heard Jake's voice whispering my name. I turned, and there he was, pale and gaunt, standing at the edge of the clearing. He mouthed the words, "Help me," before vanishing into the forest. I ran after him, but he disappeared into the shadows. The forest seemed to close in on me, the trees towering like sentinels. I stumbled upon a small clearing I hadn't seen before. At the center was a ring of stones, and within it, the remains of an old campfire. As I approached, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. Spinning around, I saw nothing but the oppressive darkness of the woods. I stayed there until dusk, hoping Jake would reappear. Instead, the forest grew darker and more menacing. The shadows seemed to move, and I could hear faint whispers. It felt like the woods themselves were alive, watching me, judging me. I left, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. Now I have nightmares where I'm lost in those woods, endlessly searching for Jake. I know I should let it go, but I can't. Something out there took him, and I fear it's still waiting for its next victim. I'm starting to believe the stories I've heard about people disappearing in those woods, never to be seen again. And I fear that if I go back, I might join them. Story 2. The Cabin in the Woods. Posted by You Sarah Thrills. Last autumn, my girlfriend and I rented a remote cabin in the deep woods of Maine for a relaxing getaway. It was miles away from civilization, the perfect place to unwind and escape the hustle and bustle of city life. But our peaceful retreat turned into a nightmare. The first couple of days were perfect. We hiked, cooked over an open fire, and enjoyed the tranquility. On the third night, we heard strange noises coming from the forest. It sounded like whispers, but we couldn't make out any words. We assumed it was just the wind and went to bed. Around midnight, we woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the cabin door. It was a slow, deliberate knock. I got up, heart pounding, and looked through the window. There was no one there. The knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. My girlfriend was terrified, begging me not to open the door. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the door, but there was no one outside, just the dark, silent woods. I shut the door, bolted it, and we tried to go back to sleep, but the knocking resumed. This time coming from the windows and walls. It was as if the forest itself was alive, trying to get in. As we were loading the car, we found strange symbols carved into the trees around the cabin. They looked like ancient runes, sinister and foreboding. We drove to the nearest town and reported what happened. The locals listened, their faces grim. One old man told us that the woods were cursed, and many people had gone missing over the years. He said the forest spirits didn't like outsiders and sometimes played tricks to scare them away. We cut our trip short and went home, but the experience haunted us. Months after our return, I started researching the area. I found stories of other couples and families who had stayed in that same cabin, all reporting similar experiences. Some described the knocking, others saw shadowy figures lurking just beyond the tree line. One account, dated back to the 1930s, mentioned a woman who went mad, claiming the trees whispered her name every night. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian. She told me the land had a dark history, tied to old rituals and sacrifices by a long-forgotten cult. The symbols we saw were protective wards, meant to keep whatever was in the forest at bay. By leaving, we had broken the protection. Last week, my girlfriend woke up with scratches on her arms, as if something had clawed at her in her sleep. The knocking has started again, now at our apartment in the city. It's getting closer, more persistent. We're planning to move, but I fear it won't matter. The forest marked us, and it's only a matter of time before it takes us back. Story 3, The Eyes in the Dark, posted by Creepy Carney. This happened to me and a group of friends last spring. We decided to go camping in a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains. The area was known for its beautiful, untouched wilderness and the promise of a true back-to-nature experience. We were experienced campers and felt confident we could handle anything the woods threw at us. We were wrong. The first night, everything went smoothly. We set up camp, cooked dinner, and shared stories around the campfire. As the fire died down and the night grew colder, we settled into our tents. That's when we started hearing the noises. At first, it was just the typical sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant animal calls. But then we heard something different, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around us. We dismissed it as a bear or some other wildlife and tried to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing just outside my tent. I froze, barely daring to breathe. The breathing was deep and rhythmic, moving slowly around the campsite. I peeked out of the tent, and that's when I saw them, glowing eyes reflecting the light of the dying embers of our fire. They were large, too high off the ground to be an animal I recognized. I whispered to my friends, waking them. We all huddled together, watching as the eyes circled our camp. Every time we shone a flashlight in their direction, they disappeared, only to reappear moments later in a different spot. It was like we were being hunted. We decided to pack up and leave at first light, but the night seemed endless. The eyes never left, watching us with an almost intelligent curiosity. The growls grew louder, closer, and we could hear branches snapping under the weight of something heavy. Finally, dawn broke, and the eyes vanished with the first light of day. We quickly packed up and started our hike back to civilization, constantly looking over our shoulders. As we reached the trailhead, we saw deep claw-like marks on the trees surrounding our camp. They were fresh, and whatever had made them had to be enormous. We reported the encounter to the park rangers, but they dismissed it as a bear sighting. We knew better. Whatever was out there was no ordinary animal. We've never been back to those woods, and I doubt we ever will. A few weeks after our trip, I started noticing strange things happening around my house. At night, I'd hear those same low growls outside my window. My dog, normally fearless, refused to go outside after dark. I found deep scratches on the trees in my backyard, identical to the ones we saw at the campsite. I reached out to a wildlife expert, showing him pictures of the scratches and describing our experience. He was baffled, saying no known animal in the area could make those marks or exhibit such behavior. He warned me to stay vigilant, and keep a record of any further encounters. One night, I woke up to find my front door wide open. I know I had locked it before going to bed,